Hello citizens, this is Councillor Gian-Carlo Carra, Ward 9 TV Light. This is a special message for Bridgeland, but also for my neighbors in Inglewood, and it has to do with one of the many things on Bridgeland Riverside's docket. So of course, there's a lot going on in Bridgeland, there's a lot going on in Inglewood. That's the great neighborhood's way. What we're dealing with in Bridgeland right now, of course, is the area redevelopment plan. Driving that is a project called the East Riverside Master Plan. We're dealing, of course, with the Main Streets program. We're dealing with parking issues. We're dealing with a ton of stuff. There's also the Bridgeland Complex Care Center. So a lot of stuff going on in Bridgeland, and I know that people who are dealing with these things on a day-to-day basis are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, but we'll get through all of this. And this is a message about the Homes for Heroes proposition. So during the election period, it came to my knowledge that city administration was negotiating with a group called Homes for Heroes to place them on as a subleasee on a city-owned piece of land in East Riverside, down in the corner here on the CNIB site. We're not going to zoom into this yet. Let's back out a little bit and talk about Bridgeland as a whole for a second. Now, that was news to me, and that was news to a lot of people in the community who have been working hard on the master planning and the local area plan process. And what's driving the local area plan process is the idea, and you know what, it actually started in East Riverside. So if we can just jump into East Riverside for a second. No, this is the, yeah, this is East Riverside. So basically, we've got the bridges over here. We've got the main street of First Avenue running along here. We've got one of the few gateways into the community over at 12th Street. We've got one at 9th Street and the other at the Edmonton Trail couplet. And the bridges, obviously, the future of transit-oriented development in the neighborhood. And we started to have a series of conversations a couple years ago now with some of the big institutional landowners over on this side of the community. Obviously, the Bridgeland Complex Care Center is part of that conversation, but also the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, the CNIB, is sitting on a piece of land here on a long-term lease with the City of Calgary. And several years ago, they approached me and they said, look, we're sitting on a giant piece of land right next to an LRT station, right next to beautiful park space, and we're rattling around in a building that no longer serves our purposes. And we would like to put ourselves on more secure financial footing, and we would like to have a conversation with the city about extending our lease so we can go out to market and find a private sector partner who will build a lot of things on this giant, beautiful piece of land right next to the zoo, right next to the parkland, right next to the LRT station. Build us a space that serves our purposes more. And instead of the City of Calgary collecting no property tax dollar on this, we could get a lot of property tax dollars being received to the city, achieve a lot of our densification targets in a thoughtful way, and we'll be able to have a space that actually works for us. And I said, CNIB, that's a beautiful idea. At the same time, we were approached by Silvera for Seniors, having the same issues. And the thing about East Riverside is that this represents a previous era's best practice for dealing with vulnerable populations. We've got a bunch of seniors who are low income. How do we take care of them? Let's build a state-of-the-art facility. Let's build it large enough so there's an economy of scale, and then we'll just basically write an annual check from the government to keep the lights on and keep these citizens fed. What we realize now is that that program doesn't make sense anymore. First off, we can't continually write a paycheck to keep the lights on and keep people fed. And the other thing, of course, is that that's not a best practice for taking care of these citizens. These people, we have the largest concentration of affordable housing in the city of Calgary in East Riverside, and they are fundamentally disconnected from the life of the community. Now we recognize that seniors, we want them integrated with kids. We want them celebrating the life of the main street, the cultural institutions of a community. It's not just about putting them into a big facility, and we can't afford those facilities anymore. So what's the solution? The solution is to take this giant chunk of land right next to the bridges and create market value solutions. Now, one of the things we were talking about early on in the planning process is how do we get the seniors all the way up the hill, many blocks away, to the central square in the heart of the community so they can actually partake in community life. And we realized that for so many of them who are fragile and with mobility challenges, this is just too far. And then we had this amazing idea. What if we brought the community to them? And what if First Avenue, which at around 9A Street peters out as commercial street and becomes more of a local community street, what if we actually ran it down 9th Street and then ran it along McDougall Road? And what if we created a pathway system that came in and ran along Bow Valley Drive and connected, to the LRT station? And then this all of a sudden becomes this amazing center of community where the largest concentration of affordable housing in the city of Calgary gets diluted and enhanced by young families and young people and adults, and all of a sudden the community life, this becomes a center of community, and a lot of our densification targets are better served because these are giant pieces of land that we're not recognizing value for. So it's a win for the institutions, it's a win for the city, and with that thinking, the East Riverside Master Plan was born. And we had CNIB at the table, we had Bishop O'Byrne at the table, we had Silvera for Seniors, we had the City of Calgary and some of our leasees in this area, and early on we had Alberta Health Services, which is one of the reasons why we're pushing back on the BCC as being, another institutional use is not a good idea. So all of that ideas, they sort of came together in a document called the East Riverside Master Plan. And the East Riverside Master Plan, plus the Main Streets project, plus a lot of the development interest along the Edmonton Trail couplet, plus the parking challenges and all the other opportunities and challenges facing Bridgeland, led the city to realize, look, we need to build a next generation ARP. And that work is underway. And while this was taking place, and the idea for a denser, more mixed use, more enriched, mixed income future for East Riverside was being considered, the City of Calgary, another branch of the City of Calgary, was negotiating with a group called Homes for Heroes to find a place for a very special and I think very interesting approach to working with veterans who have had serious issues with post-traumatic stress disorder, with addiction issues, and have fallen into homelessness. And Homes for Heroes is the idea that you have to create, or you can create, and what this organization's mission is to create small cottage clusters. Beautiful little clusters of cottages that give people their own home but are connected to the life of a mini village. And in that sort of caring environment, they would rescue heroes who had fallen into homelessness and addiction issues. And Homes for Heroes originally reached out to the City of Calgary and was looking at a site sort of right off the downtown, right on the pathway system, right in the Eau Claire area. And everyone recognized that that was not an appropriate place. It was close to everything, which checks the box that they need. They can't warehouse, these heroes in the middle of nowhere. They have to be close to services and other things. But they also need a site that, while it's close to everything, is off the beaten path and not front and center, because the whole point is recovery and not to be on display. And the city recognized, or the people in the city who were working with Homes for Heroes said, well, let's look at our inventories. And they realized that the CNIB was sitting on a giant piece of land and they weren't using anywhere near all of it. Let's zoom into that. And there was a big chunk of land here, and maybe we could build, instead of a parking lot that never gets used, a small cluster of Homes for Heroes. And it's a good idea. The problem, of course, is that it completely fights against both the best interests of the city in terms of doing much more on this site, and it fights with the idea that we already have a tremendous concentration of vulnerable people, of affordable housing in this area, and it's no longer considered a best practice to jam those potential social issues into more and more density, it's a better idea to actually dilute them into the general population and actually create a much more robust and integrated community. And so when I learned during the election with some of your community leaders that the city was in the process of signing or potentially signing deals to place a cottage cluster that would, we asked, well, how long is this for? I mean, it's a cottage cluster, so it's not permanent housing. It's, you know, they're sort of like manufactured homes in some ways. They can be moved. How long are we talking? 5 years, 3 years? And then we heard it's like, you know, 15, 20 years. And we're like, well, that definitely deeply interferes with our best hopes for timelines for this. If it was 5 years and you're out, maybe, but that just does not work here. On top of that, this is an area that's rife with social disorder right now. This is a major embankment. So when you're standing here at the gateway to the community, which by the way doesn't feel like a gateway to the community at all, this area just sort of disappears down a slope, behind barriers, into the background. And because of that, there's all kinds of questionable things that take place. There's a bit of a, we call this a fentanyl highway, which runs the stretch. It's a place of social disorder, and the idea of adding people who are vulnerable to this place didn't jibe well. The idea also that, you know, this embankment, it's perfect that you could, you know, you could add layers of underground parking that never has to go underground in the floodplain. And when you come across the bridge on a bike path or as a pedestrian, you could, right there, there'd be a plaza and there'd be a real building, and you would instantly be in the center of community. And that would be something that would be generating tax base for us, housing Calgarians in a walkable, vibrant neighborhood, and providing tax base to support the city, as well as, you know, tenancy space to a financial deal to support the ongoing and amazing work of the CNIB. And so we started to dig in, and we had a conversation with the CNIB, and they said, you know, we're in a tough spot here because we're not the mass, we don't own the land. Our leasee came to us and said there's a group that needs help, and we can't say no to that group, but we want this to go through the full process. CNIB, you know, CNIB was actually founded to help veterans who are coming back from the trenches in World War I who are suffering from blindness. So of course they're not going to say no to Homes for Heroes, even though it's potentially not in their organization's best interest. But they certainly weren't saying yes, and they were saying, look, let's go through a process and figure out whether this works. The city, of course, was concerned about saying no to Heroes, and quite frankly, the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing. And so I weighed in and I said, look, I love what Homes for Heroes is about. I understand how this checks their locational criteria, but it doesn't work for us. We've got to find them a better spot. And what we did was my office sat down and we had a big conversation about all the files on our desk, everything we know about Ward 9. And I think we came up with a brilliant idea. Can we back out to our alternative spot? So this is Homes for Heroes preferred spot right here, which they're now going through the process on, and there's a long process to get to a yes there. And what we said is, let's not fight about this, because we're in a position where we have to fight with you, and we have to say this is not appropriate, and we don't want to say no to Heroes. We want to find a better spot. And the better spot that we're proposing, this is Inglewood. And Inglewood has this amazing piece of parkland, which has recently been subject to a major regional planning process, parks planning process, called Bend in the Bow. And Bend in the Bow basically breaks this huge bend in the bow into two planning areas. Number one, this one, the Inglewood Wildlands and Bird Sanctuary, and then Zone 2. And the deal was that we would treat the Inglewood Wildlands and Bird Sanctuary land as more of a conservation project, and the second phase we would treat more as a recreational project. But in the middle of this, now the bird sanctuary was set aside by the federal government in the 1920s when we started to wake up to the importance of creating land where migratory birds could partake in their migratory lifestyles. And then this land, the Inglewood Wildlands, is a former Gulf oil refinery site. And it's land that we are slowly remediating from an industrial zone into a part of this conservation landscape. Now, if we can zoom in one more thing, this is the bird sanctuary classroom and parking lot. This is the wildlands, and this is the bird sanctuary. And what you'll notice is that there's one last remnant piece of industrial lands. There was a major piece of industry here, and we actually bought it from the family and subdivided this whole block of Inglewood, and all of these pieces of property were bought and sold to move them out of here. And this industrial land is sitting there, and they're not happy there. It doesn't work well for industrial land. And our mission over time, a policy on the books, is to acquire this, to turn it into parkland. But of course, that's a very difficult purchase because you're taking industrial land, you're finding a space in the city, and we own a lot of industrial land in places that's much more appropriate. And rather than collecting money for sale, we're basically doing a land swap and not receiving any benefit, any financial benefit, because we're converting this to park. And it's been a very difficult financial proposition to cross the finish line. And then we thought, well, look, what if there was a secret sauce? What if, as a temporary use, as we remediate this land to wilderness, we move it from industrial and we place a cottage cluster for Homes for Heroes on this piece of land. And if they're there for 20 years, this has been almost 100 years in the making. Another 20 years of housing Homes for Heroes makes sense. And it's central to everything you'd want to be central to. It's a short walk to the center of Inglewood, to buses, to all of that. But at the same time, it's deeply embedded in nature. And we thought that was a much better idea. Now, where we're at right now is we've got a bunch of organizations that are on path dependency. And what my job is going to be as the city councilor for Ward 9 is to break out of path dependency and pursue a better way to go. Now, recently, I've had this very conversation with Homes for Heroes, and they're not disinterested. They're just 2 years into trying to find a site and tens of thousands of dollars trying to sort of locate the site and make it work, to do all their due diligence on the site. And they're just, they want to find a home as soon as possible. Now, the good thing is that they participated in the city's first tranche of giving away land to not-for-profits that do social housing, and they have secured a site on 36th Avenue in Forest Lawn. And I think that they're going to be, a cottage cluster is going to be great there. But they want to do another site, and rather than have them in Bridgeland, I want to move them here. But right now, they're going through with the process. The CNIB has said, look, it's not our first choice, but we can't say no, and it's the city's call. The community has said no, thank you, but that's just the community association who are in the no, so we're going to go through a big public process and discuss the pros and cons. Steele's Transfer and the Inglewood Community Association haven't really been brought up to speed on this, but it's something to discuss there. So there's a lot of hair on this side and there's a lot of work to do. But my position right now is that this is a much better site, and I would rather work with Homes for Heroes on securing this site for them than fight them on the Bridgeland site. My further position is if they want to move forward with Bridgeland, I'm going to have to fight them. But I will do so because I think it's in the best interest of everybody for them not to be there, for them to be here. And so while I'm fighting them, I'm happy to work with them at the same time to find them a landing there. And we're many years into the Bridgeland Area Redevelopment Plan, the East Riverside Master Plan, and I want to make sure that we build a community that's more mixed use, that's more financially viable there, that creates a real gateway, and that we do that sooner than later. And this site, I want to return this to nature, and if we're able to do that by creating a Home for Heroes along the way, I think that's a wonderful step in the right direction. So that's my position. Please participate in the public process that will be forthcoming. I know that Homes for Heroes has sent out pamphlets to everyone in the Bridgeland Riverside area, basically socializing them to the idea of what they're attempting to do on the land. And at the end of the day, they're going to have to receive a land use redesignation through council. So there will be a full public hearing at the end of a lot of engagement. Hopefully, sooner rather than later, we shift the majority of our resources to this site. But until that point in time, we're going to be going through these motions, and I will be representing the position that I hope I clearly enunciated to you over the course of this video. Thank you so much for your interest. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us. This is Councillor Gian-Carlo Carra signing off.
Bye.